Buffy finds the glasses belonging to Dr. Gregory and asks about him, but Miss French says she doesn't know what happened to him. Blaine makes a gross sexual comment about Miss French, who asks him to repeat himself, and she lets it go when he changes his comment. Though she doesn't have the commanding presence of a character like Gwendolyn Post or Willow's vampire counterpart, we understand that she's threatening and not just a pushover. That anything she does is done deliberately. In this case, she's allowing Blaine to think he's in control because it makes it easier for her to control him.
It's about power.
They move on to the lesson about praying mantises. Miss French describes them as solitary animals because they eat each other, and that the female devours the male after mating. This is not exactly accurate. Technically, only one species of some 2,000 mantises actually requires biting the male's head off for mating to occur successfully, as damaging the brainstem affects sexual performance. The rest of the mantises are relatively social creatures. There is one scientist, Leland Osane Howard, who did experiments with starving mantises who would cannibalize their mates. But most mantises do not cannibalize their mates if given enough to eat. Either way, if a mantis could shapeshift into human form and be smart enough to get a job, it seems to me that she should be able to get enough food or Viagra to mate successfully while remaining civilized. This tongue-in-cheek speculation aside, the idea that female mantises eat their mates is often used to vilify femininity, warning men to be wary because women are ruthless monsters. As such, I don't like that this imagery is being brought up for the villain of the episode. More on the villain's form later. In contrast to Dr. Gregory, Miss French develops an antagonistic relationship with Buffy, presumably because she senses her Slayer powers and considers her another predator, like the hyena people do in Season 1, Episode 6, The Pack. Buffy doesn't like mantises just because of a simplistic teenage girl dislike of insects, and Miss French loves and glorifies them because she's an evil mantis in disguise. While to some degree we're laughing at Buffy's stereotypical teenage girl qualities, I don't think it's disrespectful to girls, just lightly poking fun at the Buffy character in the same sort of way as we're to laugh at Xander calling Angel attractive. And we know she's right insofar as mantises being bad. Miss French emphasizes that with regard to mantises, and of course herself, the female is more aggressive than the male, evoking the 1911 Rudyard Kipling poem, The Female of the Species, in which he repeats the line, "For the female of the species is more deadly than the male." Because of modern American culture having internalized much of second-wave feminist thought, this poem is often interpreted from this biased standpoint, as about honoring women as strong. However, it would have been understood back then to be a caution about first-wave feminism being dangerous, because women having power is a scary thing, and advocating for women to be tightly controlled. We all love Disney movies, and The Jungle Book is based off of Kipling's writings, so we kind of forget to hate the guy. Through the modern culturally biased lens, the female of the species is seen as feminist for honoring female strength and mothering instinct. Even with that bias taken into account, appreciating the poem is flawed. Honoring some kind of inherent strength associated with mothering instinct is generally seen as problematic gender essentialism. Kipling describes how the females of bears and cobras supposedly scare people more than their male counterparts, and this should also raise some eyebrows, regardless of Kipling's intentions. The idea of the female of the species being more deadly than the male is brought up because it's something that surprises people. In our aggressive patriarchal society, we honor strong, deadly men, and the idea that the female of the species is more deadly than the male subverts gender roles in ascribing the characteristics seen as masculine and thus good to the supposedly inferior feminine. This is sometimes considered feminist because it associates positive qualities with the feminine, but it ultimately serves as a trap that asserts masculine superiority to be the natural state, and surprises us with the notion that the female of the species is more masculine than the male. This works for some versions of second wave ideology, but it's still questionable and doesn't work at all for the third wave. In its relevance to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it presents Miss French thematically as a villainous counterpart to Buffy, as a strong female presence, in the manner of Darla, who I imagine was still supposed to have died in the Harvest at the time that Teacher's Pet was written. Miss French is supposed to be a feminist villain character, like Buffy is a feminist hero character, but it doesn't work in the same way that the poem doesn't work. It's a surprise because masculine strength is the norm, and the fact that it's a surprise reinforces the norm. While Buffy is that to an extent, I think that there's more to it with her. She's already strong as a person, and then she gets superpowers. And then she's a hero on a hero's journey like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. With Buffy, the subversion of the expectation of feminine weakness works as feminist because the whole outlook on the character is feminist, respecting her as a person as much as that young farm boy on Tatooine. Miss French is just a one-shot villain whose feminine strength is connected intimately with her femininity in a way that fits into the patriarchal framework that demonizes women. More on that later. Blaine makes further gross sexist comments, but he'll be punished by the narrative in the same manner as Benny in the film, so I don't care too much. Sexist men tend to have tough times in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Miss French does her best to garner male attention, almost making innuendos and describing how mantises reproduce. Xander feels like she's talking to him personally. This fits into the casual male crush narrative, as well as the teacher sexual predator narrative. At lunch, Xander babbles about Miss French being into him. Willow and Buffy just give each other amused looks and tease him a bit. I get the sense that this show was structured to be appealing to both boys and girls, so we've got a balance of relatable experiences. There's Sexy Angel for the girls, and Sexy Miss French for the boys. A focus on Xander discovering his sexuality, and shots of girls amused at their irrational male friend. This one episode may slide towards a masculine focus, but there's still something for everyone. Blaine mocks Xander by saying that Miss French agreed to meet him a day before she agreed to meet Xander, the implication being that these meetings are of a sexual nature, which they are. Again, not too different from Buffy competing with Cordelia over a guy.
When it comes to dating, I'm the slayer.
Speak of the devil. Cordelia walks in to get her special doctor-prescribed diet food from the refrigerator and finds a headless Dr. Gregory, literally a man in the refrigerator, killed off just to make Buffy's storyline more dramatic. We cut to Giles consoling Buffy, as well as Willow and Xander, but the focus is on Buffy's sadness. Notably, Willow is the one who suggests seeking justice to Dr. Gregory's killer as a form of closure. Xander is typically the aggressive one, but he's just trying to deal with the gory imagery burned into his brain. This is really the first time he's seen death. Jesse was killed off screen, and a vampire turning to dust isn't as visceral as finding a body. Willow is meek, but she voices the thought, taking a step forward on her journey to becoming a powerful warrior for the side of good. Buffy questions if it's Fork Guy, the vampire Angel warned her about, and Giles tells her all the information he knows about the guy. Buffy, who is smart, figures out that Fork Guy's MO is different from what happened to Dr. Gregory, meaning that there are two big threats at the moment. Giles asks Buffy to not go hunting until they know more, and she promises she won't.
It would be wrong.
Buffy goes hunting that night. She encounters Fork Guy, but their battle is interrupted by bizarrely on top of things cops, and they go fleeing into the night. Buffy tries to catch up with him and observes him approach Miss French. Miss French gives him a look, and Fork Guy turns tail and runs for the sewer.
Generally speaking, when scary things get scared, not good.
The next day, Buffy reports to Giles. He starts out annoyed that she broke her promise, but instantly becomes sympathetic when she describes having to fight with Fork Guy, like the nice father figure he is. Buffy then brings up Miss French, and it's clear that Giles is also affected by her pheromones. He speaks about her in a charming sort of way and seems too polite to intend to call her attractive, but it bubbles out of him because he's not in full control over his faculties. He gets over it quickly and is open to Buffy's suggestion that Miss French is a demon. It's important to note that Miss French's pheromones affect all heterosexual or bisexual males in proximity. Giles comes out of it easily, but he's also an older, jaded man who isn't the target of her seduction like Xander is. So there's no point in really getting angry at Xander's actions specifically, like they're a reflection of his character as some feminists do, probably just because they're biased against him for his actions in future episodes.
I'm you from the future.
Principal Flutie intercepts Buffy on the way to class and insists that she needs to talk to the school counselor because she was one of the students who found Dr. Gregory's body. He babbles about how everyone needs to give voice to their stress and express their emotions, and he offers Buffy a hug before quickly changing his mind because he doesn't want her to think that he's trying to sexually harass her. Flutie is a comedically ineffectual authority figure who doesn't quite get what role he needs to play in the modern world. The script for Welcome to the Hellmouth introduces him as a man struggling between the role of strict disciplinarian and likable pal to his students, but I only really see that with the Flutie of the unaired pilot. Flutie in the show seems like an adult more childlike than the kids, someone who wants to be a caring friend to the students but having no idea how to do it effectively. Here we see him struggling to be caring while flipping through a bunch of rules he thought up for himself that he doesn't really know how to navigate. The topic of sexual harassment by a school official that isn't actually sexual harassment is often used comedically to laugh at accusations of sexual harassment, implying that they're mostly just made up and is thus anti-feminist. But that's not what goes on here with Flutie. We laugh at him for reasons that go beyond the mention of sexual harassment. We laugh at him because he's a cute, bumbling authority figure struggling with his role as a sensitive guy.
I'm surprisingly sensitive.
Flutie parks Buffy outside the counselor's office, and she starts listening to Cordelia talk about finding the body. It starts out sounding like Cordelia is revealing her inner pain and will be sympathetic, but she ends up saying that she's super grateful for finding the corpse because she hasn't been able to eat, which has been great for her figure. Buffy thinks this is the weirdest thing she's ever heard. Cordelia will eventually become sympathetic, starting with Season 1, Episode 11, Out of Mind, Out of Sight, but she comes from this extremely shallow place. Though reminiscent of Buffy's origin as a popular girl of Henry High, Cordelia is significantly more shallow and more of a mean girl to contrast with where Buffy is now as an unpopular kid. Cordelia's superficial qualities are so extreme we're meant to find them humorous. And it's interesting we're supposed to find her obsession with dieting funny, when American culture is very harsh to girls who don't make every effort to be as skinny as possible. This leads to us just accepting that Buffy would find it insulting that Giles wouldn't take care to draw her as skinny in Season 4, Episode 10, Hush, and to Buffy fans thinking that Riff Regan would be unsuitable to play Willow because of her weight. Laughing at Cordelia here reminds me of how we're led to laugh at movie Buffy for daring to remove her sacred birthmark that never shows up in the show. We laugh at those who go along with unreasonable beauty standards without appreciating them as victims of those cultural standards. Buffy comes late to class, and Miss French decides to blow her cover for some reason by turning her head 180 degrees to look at her. Buffy, Willow, and Giles tackle the Miss French mystery in the library. Buffy realizes that their lesson on insects mentions some insects being able to turn their heads all the way around, leading to a bizarre message of, "Do your homework, kids." She does her homework and reports that praying mantises are the only animals that turn their head 180 degrees. Except for owls. Why couldn't she be an owl? That makes as much sense as her being a mantis. Or she could be this girl. Anyway, the spirited message to the kiddies about doing their homework is followed up with a lusty teacher seducing her vulnerable teenage student.
Who writes this stuff?
Miss French invites Xander to finish the project at her place, being very overtly sexual. She doesn't quite say, "I've been a bad girl," but she might as well.
After the spanking, the oral sex.
She positions herself as a subordinate figure to play on his notions of how men are supposed to be in charge and competent, referencing the fantasy at the beginning that shows us his idea of himself as powerful on top of things and protective of a weakling girlfriend. Miss French presents a scenario that plays into those expectations, but we know that she's not really subordinate. She's a demonic threat, and she's a teacher who has power and shouldn't abuse that power to take advantage of one of her students. There's this wacky storyline about her being a praying mantis, but there's also the subtext about how teachers can take advantage of their students. A main concept in modern feminist theory is the concept of a rape culture, a culture that promotes and normalizes rape. One manifestation of American rape culture is the way that rape of men is not treated as a full violation in the way it is with women. Buffy suffers from a lot of that, but Teacher's Pet is an episode that gets it right. Sorta. Oftentimes in the real world, in America and elsewhere, a story will surface about a female teacher taking advantage of her male student, and a lot of people will react with indifference. Masculinity is so associated with strength that people assume that men are always in control of sexual encounters, so they must always enjoy it, and should be praised for getting some, because they must be studly, where these folks would recognize abuse if it occurred with a male teacher and a female student. Teacher's Pet leads us to recognize the inherent vulnerability in boys like Xander, promoting a feminist message insofar as it challenges rape culture in this circumstance. Xander walks out of there feeling studly, but we know that he's a victim. There's then a gross-out moment where Miss French eats bugs.
Pecans with a very pleasant crunch.